We're back with Bo Armstrong. The new album is If Your Tired Heart Is Aching, and you just heard Which Way Is Home. Bo, tell me about all of the places you have roots.
Yeah, I've kind of bounced around a fair bit since I was in high school. I'm from Dallas, Texas originally, um, and I am constantly. I'm not constantly reminding people that I'm from Texas, but it seems to come up often, and it does seem my pride in Texas sort of grew once I left it. Once I moved away from Texas when I was 15. Played ice hockey growing up, and that brought along a lot of really interesting opportunities throughout my life, especially as a teenager and young adult. I spent a lot of time in Northern Ontario in summers training and playing hockey. Um, I went away to a school in Connecticut. It's where I spent my high school years for 3 years. Hockey was a big part of my experience, and the whole reason why, or one of the main reasons why I was up there to begin with. Um, so then I spent a few years in New York for college, Central New York. After college, I graduated and I moved to the Mississippi Delta, where I taught elementary school for a few years. And then from there, I went from one extreme to another and moved to New York City, where my girlfriend at the time, turned fiance, turned wife, was living, or to be closer to where she was living. So I've just bounced around a lot. I've kind of always gone where I felt I could get the most out of something and the most out of myself. And I think that's made for, a more like a richer experience as a songwriter. You're able to pull from a lot when you've experienced a lot or been through a lot or lived in unique different places. I also, I think I'm a Texan, but my parents are not. My dad, both of my parents are from the Northeast. So I always sort of felt some allure to that part of the country, which also just made me think of myself as maybe more than a Texan, right? Because not all of my roots were in Texas. So I guess long story short, I've just kind of bounced around a lot, and I think that's all played into what you hear in my songs, I guess.
Which college in New York did you go to? Quite
I
a
went to I went to Hamilton College. It's in a small town in between Syracuse and Albany, off of 90. That
Yeah, that's definitely a small one.
yeah.
And what was playing hockey like?
Yeah, it's funny. Like everybody, when I talk about it these days, it's I I I was a hockey player from Texas, right? Which sounded totally insane, but the truth is, a professional the Dallas Stars moved to Dallas from Minnesota in '92. And that, I was a little kid around then. And when they moved to town, I just became obsessed with it. And I wasn't alone. Hockey really grew in Dallas. And by the time I was 15, it was, pretty big for, the amount of time that Dallas had a professional team. And if you look at Dallas now, there's tons and tons and tons of hockey coming from the area. So yeah, I grew up playing, and it became like a really special, important part of my life. It took me a lot of places. Um, it got to the point where I was traveling a lot for it, sort of in middle school and junior high. And it started to, the truth was I wasn't going to be able to just keep going to school and playing hockey. I was missing too much school for hockey, so I had to find another way to pursue my academics and hockey at the same time. And that's when the boarding school option became, or was presented to me by a coach. That kind of changed the trajectory of, I guess, without sounding too dramatic, it really did shift the course of my life.
Yeah, what's your opinion on the Northeast as a Texan?
I it's funny. I always loved my New England, Northeast experience as a Texan. It's also, I guess my opinion on that has changed a lot in the last 10 years. But it was always fun to be because you were an outsider, especially when you were in a pretty controlled environment like a boarding school. There aren't a ton of kids from too many places outside of New England, so you kind of already had this label attached to you. So I spent a lot of time either trying to prove that label was wrong or just accepting that that label was true. I was a kid named Bo from Texas who played a guitar. So people, I think, maybe had some assumptions here and there. But over time, that kind of evolved. I don't think I was that singularly dimensional, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I think it was always a little fun to be the Texan in New England.
And you said that's changed over the last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I guess without getting too far into it, it's just like, you know, I think there was a fun romanticism about being from Texas 10 years ago. And I think some of that has sort of, I'm not going to say disappeared entirely, but there's new stigmas these days. And yeah, it's hard to associate too much with one thing, I think, is the way I would put it.
Yeah, there have certainly been some things that have gone on in Texas that won't fly in the Northeast,
Yeah. And
vice
that,
versa.
right, exactly. And that in a strange way, that kind of all goes back to how we all have to evolve. We were talking about, love and relationships. Like me being from Texas in 2005 meant something different than me being from Texas in 2020 after I've had, 15 years worth of life lived and other, influences, whether that's geographically or politically or, from people. We all change, we all evolve. But I think there's always some attachment to the place you're from. And we get into that a little bit on the record where, the idea of home evolves over time. And I think it's just true. We can try to, nostalgically attach a lot of who we are to maybe where we're from. But what I've learned over the last couple of years in particular is, the idea of home really has to evolve, and it has to change as well.
Yeah, you're making your home in Nashville. There is the Texas style of songwriting flying there for you.
Um, I think so. I think Nashville's a funny, interesting place when you get into the songwriting world. I think there's sort of long been an appreciation for Texas songwriters in Nashville, which I think was kind of born out of a lot of Texas songwriters not having any respect for Nashville songwriters and leaving and going back to Texas. I think where I sit now is somewhere in between. And that's, yeah, it's kind of why we're in Nashville to begin with. My family is from Texas. I'm from Texas. My wife is from the Northeast. Nashville is right there in the middle. It seemed like a great place for us to, try to start a life together. We have all the music scene is here. Yeah.
Yeah, if I had to pick between the Nashville and Texas music scene, I would have to say Texas is much less polluted.
Yeah. Oddly, like, I don't think too many people would really argue with that. It's different. It's different. There's like a different
It's not that there's a lack of quality in Nashville, it's
totally.
that they aren't focused well on that quality.
Yeah, well, and there's different motives and different incentives, right? Texas, I think, has, I guess, in true Texas independent spirit, there's always been that like school of thought that you can build it your own way and you can write songs your own way, and you can put in the work and build your audience a certain way. And I think one of the most appealing things about the Texas music scene in general is that, there are loyal fan bases. There are a lot of singer-songwriters who just say, this is the way I do things, and if you like it, come along for the ride. And a lot of people tend to jump on those trains and follow along with their careers. And that, again, that's not to say that that doesn't exist elsewhere. Think about Boston folk scene is really kind of the same concept. Beautiful songwriting, people appreciating the songs for what they are and the artists for who they are, and they follow along. And that's always been a thing. That's been a thing for decades, in the same way that it has been in Texas. And Nashville's just different, I think, because again, there's different there's different motives here. There's different incentives. There's a focus on mainstream radio, and that plays an important role in music, period. And I think sometimes Nashville gets a bit of a bad rap for losing sight of some of the things in music that make music special. But really, it would be unfair to say that Nashville isn't focused on songs, because I think there will be plenty of people, myself included, that will acknowledge that people in Nashville are after the song as much as they are about the artist singing them, and the glitz and glam that goes around it. And I actually think even in the last few years, there's kind of been across like even commercial radio, that there's been like a resurgence and like an emphasis on songwriting, and you're starting to see a lot more artists willing to take outside cuts that they're not writing on. And I think that's a great thing for the community, for both songwriters and artists who are building their careers. So
Yes, it's gotten a little better,
it's
although
good.
I'm still always going to be focused on the less mainstream radio.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's me, and me too, I think, or especially as an artist, like, I don't think there's a place for what I like, the music that I like to make on a mainstream radio station, but who knows? I don't know.
Well, I always like to close off my chats by having the guest pick a song to close the show. I give them a little category based on the album, based on the conversation. So for
Okay.
you, it's going to be a lasting love song.
A lasting love song. This could be any song,
Just not your own.
just not my own. Um, I'm gonna give you a good one. Um, does it matter if I don't know if you would have heard it before? Is that okay?
If it's FCC clean, I'll just play it.
It is FCC clean. It is called "You Can't Do Enough," and it is by a singer-songwriter buddy of mine, Colton Venner.
All right, I have not heard it before, but I will go look it up
Yeah.
and I will give it a spin.
All righty.
Well, Armstrong, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
New album is If Your Tired Heart Is Aching.